here on Farm Kenya. On this second part of the show, we want to get right into the discussion. And as we had said that before we went on to that short commercial break, the reason we are discussing what we're discussing here today, the conversation around climate proofing for nutrition in the country, is to essentially get a feeling on just how food sustainability can be driven through a market systems approach that enables different people play their role, but also to be able to eke a livelihood along the value chain in sustainable fashion. And of course, our expert still here in studio, Dr. Christine Chege. The question that many people I know must be asking, what exactly do we mean when we talk about climate proofing nutrition? What exactly is that?
So we are looking at how can we address climate change. So it's about mitigation and adaptation of climate change.
Yes.
To address nutrition outcomes, or that to make sure that people have access, availability and affordability of nutritious foods. For example, just to give a very good example, if you look at what has been happening even here in Kenya, we've had a lot of changes in rainfall. I remember when I was growing up, we knew very well that 15th of March, it's going to rain. And when it rains, farmers are already planting. But nowadays, no, it doesn't happen that way. All that is climate change. We see a lot of drought, a lot of changes in temperature. All these affects how food is produced, the productivity, the production, and even the transportation of that food. For example, if there's a lot of flooding and roads cannot be passed, you can't pass through the roads, then even transportation of the food becomes a problem. So it's really looking at how to address or to mitigate all those issues to make sure that we are able to address nutrition, even more specifically, dietary challenges. Because diet, we link it directly with agricultural work.
Yes. So then for me, that having painted that picture, the thing that immediately arises is then that our consumption patterns are driven by international food systems, where most of our food might be traveling tens of thousands of kilometers. Like when the war broke out in Ukraine, we had immediate hiccups here. During the 2020 situation around COVID, we saw the situation around oil, and because of the plantations in Malaysia, and of course the sunflower situation in Europe, the stopping of exports, those sorts of things. This puts our food security in serious danger because we're not in control.
Yep.
So how do we gain back this control?
Yep. So several pieces there. One is looking at our production systems.
Yes.
When we talk of the production, what are we producing and what the volumes of those commodities we are producing? And going back to what I was mentioning earlier, we have a lot of traditional commodities.
Yes.
Are we leveraging on these traditional commodities? What is indigenous in the Kenyan, for the Kenyan soils?
Yes.
Or are we looking at the wheat and maize and other commodities that are important from other areas? So if we can look at what we can produce locally, of course, international trade plays a role as well.
Yes.
Like we said, we may not be able to address the entire consumption of the country using our own production until we get to the point where the production efficiencies are good, we are able to mitigate the climate change. And at the same time, we need to address the market system. How do we transport this food from the production hubs to the consumption hubs?
Yes.
We've seen this as a big challenge in Kenya, where you see some of the farmers, majority of the farmers actually have huge production.
Yes.
And the food is going to lost. Like it's getting lost at the farm level or even at farm gate, whereas consumers are crying that they don't have the same food to consume. They don't have that food. So how do we connect our production and our consumption hubs? So these are areas that we need to address as a country, because I feel we still have a big gap there.
So where is the disconnect? Because if you think about it, a lot of the foods that we consider traditional here are grown elsewhere as well. We see in the United States, in Mexico, and the like, complete commercialization of sweet potatoes. Yeah. Even for the Indoma and things like that. They are able to get to farms because they're considered finished products and have a commercial value chain around them. Yeah. This doesn't seem to be the case in our situation. So where do we even start?
One big gap in our market system is the processing, like you've mentioned. So if it's the farmers or the private sector who are processing these commodities, we actually don't have so many of those happening at the farm level or post-farm gate. So you find there's a lot of waste. If we can link our production with the processing to make sure we don't have that loss at the production level, we have the processors who are able to add value to these commodities and then linking to the consumer. So the kind of market information is also a big gap. We don't have very good market information, for instance, to know where is production happening. As a processor, where do I source my production, my volumes? I go process, and where is the market? So the link between the production, the consumption, and the processing points is a big gap as well that we need to address.
Yes, in terms of policy around this sector, government in the past has taken a traditional approach and said we are for job and wealth creation, the hustler movement. So they will support Mama Mboga and build markets and that sort of thing. But that's not necessarily modernizing this value chain because if you think in the traditional, in the contemporary sense of manufacturing and value addition, first you want volumes, then you want a standardized process, and then you have standardized consumption so that everyone will go to a supermarket, for example, or a market and pick this product, and this is how they will deal with it. It has a standard branding, so they know what to expect, what to look out for. It has been tested and those sorts of things. All those are things we could do here in this country, but nothing so far.
Yeah. Okay. Also, it comes with differences in terms of the consumption. I mean, the consumer profiles.
Yes.
Like if you look at the Kenyan market, especially on the side of the consumers, we have a lot of low-income consumers. For instance, even looking at Nairobi, we have slum dwellers. We have a lot of low-income consumers in that space. And many of them actually depend on those informal markets. So the argument here is, and there's a lot of literature around this discussion, should we formalize the informal sector? Should we make it formal?
Yes.
And the question is,
yes. So for me, I have a bit of pushback on that because I have often had a lot of people, and not just low income, but quite a large number, swear they will not eat processed food. And they'll say, mi nataka nyama fresh, ile inamwaga damu, or I want green leafy veggies that are fresh, and that sort of thing.
Yes.
Yet this can be delivered to them at a much lower cost if they were simply bulked up and delivered through a formal situation. Simple example, we have supermarkets that sell fresh produce in this town.
Yes.
And the prices at which you get them compared to some of those markets are actually much, much less.
Yes.
But people are afraid to walk in and buy this. So is it a question of building trust? Is it a question of standardizing this value chain that brings this there, or what happens so that we can have a market system that works for everybody?
I pin it down to policies. So we have a lot of, like you've mentioned, if you go to some of the supermarkets, the vegetables that are sold in that market are actually same price or even lower than some of the, what we would call the open markets or traditional markets. But people may not have trust to buy those commodities from some sources because they think maybe they are sourced from areas where the production is not very well done. There's maybe a lot of chemicals. They don't trust the sources. So the issue of trust is one.
You will see a large one and say GMO.
Exactly. They see a big leaf and they think this one has a lot of pesticides or it's GMO. So the trust, we need to build trust around that. And secondly, we need to have policies. I know in Kenya we have very good policies. We can ask whether they're implemented or not, but if we can have policies that safeguard, especially the food safety component of our food system, this will be a big win. Because currently you find some vegetables, even in the open air markets or even in the other areas, some people will say, if I go to Gekomba, I'm going to buy vegetables there. Maybe they are produced from the sewage or, near the sewage areas or using sewage water. They don't trust the source. But if we have policies...
Because that is informal.
Exactly.
But if we had a formalized place with standardization and testing and those sorts of things...
Even with standardization, then we need to have the testing to make sure that it is actually safe and to make sure everybody follows the rules according to food safety requirements.
We actually did real research here, and 98% of the market does not demand testing. In fact, they consider it a waste of time.
Yes.
And they are happy to just pick up their veggies, assess them from their eyes and walk along. In fact, they say, ukikuta ile mekulwa na wadudu, sasa ni hiyo.
Hiyo ndio nzuri.
Yes.
Exactly. So we need to address our policies. We need to put them in place. We need to make sure they're implemented. We need to make sure there is regular checks in the markets, whether it's the formal market or informal markets. We need to make sure that's check in terms of the food safety, even random checks, checking the vegetables and testing them to make sure they don't have excess pesticides beyond the required amount, So that check should be done. And if it's done as per the policies, I believe we wouldn't be in a good place in terms of the food safety. But the biggest challenge we have in our markets now is the food safety issues. It is huge. Everyone wants to source the commodities. Think of it from informal or formal markets. Food safety issues are the same. Of course.
If you break down what you're saying, food safety either comes down to, on the front end, the handling.
Yes.
So the way this produce has been brought to market, either contamination, degradation, poor storage, hence contamination, those sorts of things.
Yes.
But also the chemical aspect at the farm,
Yes.
what was sprayed by the farmer, how long did they stay, did they follow the rules, did they use the right product? We have policies for all this.
Exactly.
So how come we still have a problem?
Implementation, as I said, we have very good policies. Yes. Everything indicating how much, what kind of pesticide should be sprayed for into to what products,
yes.
and how long you need to wait before harvesting. And you know, if you harvest according to the requirements, then it doesn't have the chemical residues. And the same thing in terms of transportation, in terms of handling at the markets, all those rules, regulation, policies are there. So it's about implementing and following up, ensuring that everybody follows the rules.
So in this case, it's testing to ensure that farmers are actually sort of surveillance,
yes.
to ensure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. Testing of the product while it goes to market and discarding what is not acceptable.
Absolutely.
So that then punishes those who don't follow the rules. But then also, I think for me, education of consumers so that they can then try and hold the system to account in one way or another.
Yeah. So when you think of consumers, several pieces come in here. It's not just about food safety, but we need education and awareness for consumers in many ways. First of all is having consumers get information and awareness on food safety, to know what kind of foods do you need to consume. If it's not safe, you don't need to buy it, because you may eat nutritious foods like vegetables and fruits, but we say if it is not safe, it is not healthy, it's not nutritious. So you shouldn't consume it. At the same time, consumers need to be empowered and to be informed in terms of what do I need to choose for my own consumption, what's beneficial to me as a consumer in terms of nutrition.
Yes.
We've done quite a lot of studies on that and a lot of research, what I would call research for development. For example, in Kisumu,
yes.
Where we've done research with consumers, trying to understand what is driving their choices of choice of different diets that they consume,
yes.
and different food items that they consume. And you find, like, especially for vegetables, many of them, either they don't know where to source the vegetables, they're not interested to buy the indigenous, or they say they're too expensive. But then after we had a lot of awareness creation with the
yes.
consumers. And after several rounds of training, awareness, showing them how to cook. I remember initially at the beginning, when we went there, we were telling them that children should be eating meat and eggs. And they say, no, a child of 2-3 years cannot eat meat. They'll choke.
It's actually a cultural thing.
Exactly. So it's a culture. So we have to change that culture and show them actually they can eat eggs.
Yes.
They can eat meat, and show them through cooking demonstration and cooking the food with them and testing, feeding the children with them until they came to realize actually the children can eat and they're doing
working,
well.
yes.
That's working. And now after 2 years of implementation and training and changing that, trying to change the behavior,
yes.
we can see they have changed their practices. They acknowledge the importance of eating nutritious foods and the importance of diversifying the diets for children and for every household member. So it is a process,
yes.
but we will get there, and we need to invest in information, communication, and social behavior change, especially on nutrition.
Okay. We've talked about a lot of things, but one really important one is the fact that Kenyans will continue to resist certain aspects of innovation, in this case, biotechnology. 71 years after the announcement of the creation of this technology in the first instance, GMO, Kenyans still call it new technology first. Secondly, a lot of Kenyans will buy mitumba clothes, right?
Yeah.
From China and the US and other places. 99% of the cotton in those places is now GMO or biotech, so to say. We've been wearing mitumba for decades. Kenyans are still walking around, and most of them happily. Think about the things like cornflakes and other imported things from those jurisdictions, most of it biotech.
Yeah.
But in this case, because of the approach, I'll say, by the public, by opinion leaders, by politicians and others who choose not to believe the science, but choose to believe their own kind of information, our farmers, our consumers can still not enjoy the benefits of biotech? Where do we go?
Yeah, again, it boils down to information. You know, if we can have the scientific evidence, you know, research comes in here strongly. Research to provide scientific evidence on what is actually happening with these biotech commodities, and are they safe to consume? Are they not safe? Provide evidence, and I believe with communication, then people will be able to make the right decision.
Would you consume BT products yourself?
Personally,
Yes.
I think yes. I guess I've even already consumed it. You know, the minute you're traveling across different countries.
Is it something you'd advocate for others? Because for me, for me, therein lies the problem that people look to opinion leaders for this confirmation that this thing is safe, that this thing is okay for us, because the negative stories are amplified, right? Oh, these things will cause cancer. These things are not good for you. You ask for evidence. People have these conspiracy theories and the like. But on the flip side, like I said, people have been wearing these biotechnology-driven cotton garments for over 10 years. In fact, for far longer, because this thing is 71 years old today. And they're still fine and they're walking around. Maybe we'll discover something, but so far, So do you then discard all the good things? And remember, for biotech cotton, you're not eating it. You're going to wear this thing. They seem to think it's going to contaminate other things. And you ask, okay, so what does that mean? We now know that it's out there with the farmers, and I think farmers are starting to do well. But there's so much challenge in other spaces around this. How do we
need the right information. I mean, you know, sometimes we get a lot of hearsay. And people just saying, oh, it's not safe, it's like this. And, you know, people maybe with their own interest disseminate information which is not correct. So we really need that information which is correct through either research, being able to show what are the consequences of consuming the BT crops, you know, and people then can make the right decision. The same way I would say, if you look at ultra-processed foods all over, like these are the products that are processed excess, they have a lot of sugar, salt, they're not healthy for consumption. But then people are not asking what's the consequences of consuming these commodities. You know, research has shown us if you're consuming these, they're actually leading to the long-term consumption. Diseases, exactly. They have lifestyle diseases, non-communicable diseases, you know, and we can see that already happening in Kenya. So people need to relate the different information we get with research evidence that is true, that can be verified, and then be able to make right decisions.
So the reason I was asking that question, and we don't have much longer to go, but is because I know that Calro pioneered some sort of really innovative, really humongous, really big cassava around 10 years ago. This thing was hitting 60 tons per acre. It would resolve a lot of the things we were talking about if this went mainstream. But then people look at it and say, hiyo kitu ni kubwa inakaa GMO. We will not touch it. But for me, I have my approach is simple. When people fly in aeroplanes, we don't involve them in learning how to build an aeroplane first and how to paint it and that sort of thing. So if we were to process these foods, whether into crisps or flour or things like that, then the perception that would have been created initially about the size and those sorts of things is no longer there. So maybe that becomes the approach that scientists need to take to start to process, value add, and actually move these crops up the value chain. Use the food system to transform this into things that people will find more palatable and easier to deal with. So how come experts are not taking those approaches?
No, actually they're there. I mean, there are different approaches to making different types of commodities available for consumption in different forms. And it's the same thing, especially like you mentioned, for these traditional foods which are not consumed regularly. If you go to our Gen Z now and you are giving them cassava or doma, arrowroots, they may not be very enticed to consume it. But you make it into flour, which is currently happening a lot, they'll consume it.
So then, and the reason I'm asking it is because if you think about our consumption patterns, we have mainstreamed, for lack of a better word, some foods. We buy tons and tons and tons of flour, of wheat from the Russias and the Caucasus, the Eastern Europe. right? We buy a lot of wheat from likes of Mexico, Australia, and the like. We buy a lot of different things from, and it's because the market system has backed this up and can deliver it to your doorstep safely, conveniently, that sort of thing. So how about using these sorts of transformative systems for our produce to be able to deliver them in the same way that people can find it useful?
Yep. And also, in addition to that, looking at the different consumer profiles.
Yes.
For instance, if you look at Kenya broadly, even an example of Nairobi,
yes,
we have many women in the market who are working. Initially, people would have a lot of time to prepare different types of commodities. And they will take time, prepare their food slowly without hurry. But nowadays, everyone is working.
Yes.
We have very few stay-at-home moms or stay-at-home dads who will spend a lot of time cooking.
Yes.
So we have to acknowledge there are these changes within the demographics, within the lifestyle, and bring innovations that will be able to address these issues or changes without affecting our dietary choices.
Yes.
And on that, if you look at, for example, the issue of supermarket, many people go to buy things from supermarket because it's very convenient.
Yes, especially the deli.
And is it safe? Is it nutritious? Is it healthy? Possibly not. So making the right decision in terms of what you buy. Yes, I don't have time to prepare, but do I want to buy noodles that I'll boil for 3 minutes and just consume because my child is going to school and I didn't have time to prepare?
Yes.
Within the Alliance of Biodiversity International and SEAT, we have what we call the pre-cooked beans.
Yes.
We've come up with, together with Calro and other partners, come up with pre-cooked beans, which cook very fast, like within less than 20, 30 minutes, your meal is ready. And this is meant to address some of these challenges. Like people don't have time to cook beans for hours and hours, wasting energy, wasting time. So you come up with these innovations that can help mitigate some of those challenges. Like there's urbanization, people don't have time to cook.
Yes.
And you give them a healthy option that they can actually prepare a healthy meal or a nutritious meal without necessarily going to the supermarket and buying some ultra-processed foods. So these are some of the innovations we need to think about. And same thing with vegetables.
Yes.
We've been working with a lot of farmers trying to see, people complain that vegetables, like especially traditional vegetables, managu, terere, they take a lot of time to sort, to remove from the stalks, and to cut, to shred them. So we already have innovation with private sectors that are already starting to package already sorted, shredded, safe vegetables.
Yes.
So that for you as a consumer, you just need to pick, maybe even blanch it and just eat it. Very few minutes. So these are some of the innovations we need to think about.
But will your market agree, which has sworn to eat them fresh, agree to eat this
now,
process?
Behavior change. We need that behavior change, we ask consumers to see, yes, you need your vegetables. You can eat them fresh, of course. They are more tasty if you want them fresh, that's fine. But still, if you want to try new products, which may not have a very big difference in terms of taste, but they retain the same nutrients.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in closing, in 30 seconds, now, because we've talked a lot about either behavior change, the needs that, the changes we have to make to the market systems to make this approach work and that sort of thing, what would you be saying to the market, the farmers out there, the various players?
Yes, I would have a message to everyone within the food system. It's the farmers, it's the policymakers, it's us, the researchers, and different other market actors like transporters. We really have a role to play. If we want to transform our food system and make it, be able to provide nutritious, safe, healthy foods to consumers, we need to work as a team. So multi-sectoral approach needs to be applied, and each of us needs to play a role. I talked earlier of the policies. The policymakers need to make sure they have the right policies in place, and those policies are actually implemented. The researchers need to provide research evidence, like you're talking about the technology, biotechnology, and other kinds of research. Let's provide research evidence to show that what needs to be done and to provide evidence to policymakers to make informed decisions. Same thing to consumers. They need to make right decisions in terms of the dietary choices because that has long-term implication in terms of their health. So if each of us can play our role, I believe in Kenya, the Kenyan food system has a very good future. and we are moving in the right direction. Yeah.
I think you left out the private sector and bringing this to market.
Absolutely, yes.
It's a big opportunity to
yes.
be the person whose brand actually makes this difference.
Yes. And one thing we say with the private sector, yes, there is value addition and there is marketing, but let's do marketing value addition for nutrition. Not just for market,
yes.
taking the product to the market just to make sure that people are consuming it, but ask yourself, is it nutritious?
Yes.
Is it safe? Yeah.
Okay, indeed, Dr. Ari, unfortunately, we are out of time, but thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. Quite informative. And of course, getting people to think about all the things we've talked about and ask themselves the questions about whether they're doing the right thing about the nutrition in the food that they're eating, and of course, creating a market system that works for everybody. Asante sana.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Peter.
Well, that's it for this edition of the Farm Kenya show today. Of course, we're on back here tomorrow, same time, 3 p.m. for yet another edition. But for now, the news continues in Swahili. My name is Peter Kaba. It has been a blast. Do continue to enjoy the rest of your viewing. Kwaheri ya kuonana. Thank you.